Snow fell like sifted flour over the town of Sonawy, softening the sharp edges of the wooden storefronts and the judgments curling behind lace curtains. The train hissed into the depot with a final sigh, steel groaning against steel, and from its belly emerged a man no one expected. Thaddeus Boone rolled down the platform in a wheelchair worn with travel dust. A blue wool coat draped over his narrow shoulders, collar turned against the wind, and a wide-brimmed hat shadowed the tired grace of his face. He moved slow, not from hesitance, but from the kind of caution a man learns when he's fallen before and remembers the sound of it. A crate of books balanced on his lap, one hand guiding the wheels, the other gripping a letter folded and refolded so many times it bore the creases of hope. The wind caught it once, fluttering like a broken-winged bird, and he snatched it back with quiet precision. He had memorized the words, but still he kept it close. The station master gave him a glance too long, then looked away. Behind Thad, the last passengers scattered like leaves, some to wagons, others into the arms of kin. No one waited for him. Not until she stepped forward. She was tall, sharp-jawed, in a fur-trimmed cloak and riding boots. Her eyes scanned him, stalled at the wheels, then slid to the cane strapped to the side. A pause bloomed between them, heavy as wet snow. "You're Thaddeus Boone?" she asked, voice clipped and taut. He nodded, lifting his hat in greeting. "And you must be the widow." She raised a hand, cutting him off. "You didn't say you were crippled." The platform, already quiet, seemed to hush further. Somewhere a child cried. Somewhere a boot shifted. "I didn't lie," Thad said evenly. "Just didn't find it necessary to lead with my legs." She laughed once, a bitter, airless thing. "You think a woman wants a husband she has to push?" Her brothers flanked her, large and frowning, neither saying a word. She turned away, stiff-backed, and mounted the waiting buckboard. "You should have stayed in whatever pity hole you came from," she called over her shoulder. "You ain't fit for ranch life. You ain't fit for any life tied to me." And just like that, they were gone. The snow seemed to fall harder after that. Or maybe Thad just felt it more. He sat still for a long moment, hand resting over the letter. Then, without hurry, he wheeled himself down the plank ramp, one slow rotation at a time. No one stopped him. No one offered help. He passed the saloon where two men leaned in a doorway, watching with the kind of faces that didn't know kindness unless it came in a bottle. "Well," one drawled, "guess love's got eyes after all." Thad didn't look up. He kept moving. Past the general store. Past the church where icicles dripped from the eaves like knives. Past the hotel that would charge him full price for a bed he couldn't climb into. He reached the edge of town, where the wind ran freer and the sky opened wide. The land stretched in all directions, quiet, brutal, and honest. There was no sympathy in it. No shame either. There, beneath a skeletal cottonwood, he paused. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from memory. Gunfire in the canyon. Blood warming the dust. The sharp crack of a sniper's bullet, and then nothing. Just legs that wouldn't listen anymore, no matter how loud he begged them. He opened the letter again. Read her words for the 100th time. "You sound like a man who understands the quiet. That's rare in this world." She hadn't. Not really. Not when it counted. Snow gathered on his hat brim. He let it. For a moment, he wanted to disappear beneath it, become part of a land. One more forgotten stump in the endless plain. A soft creak caught his ear. From the alley between the smithy and the apothecary, a woman stepped out. Not the widow, no finery, no riding boots. She wore a plain brown shawl, a laundry basket at her hip, and eyes that flicked over him once with no flinch, no pause. She looked away quickly, as if ashamed to have seen, and vanished back into the shadowed alley. He caught the scent of lye soap, warm linen, and wood smoke. Then, nothing. He turned back toward the road, his wheels crunching in fresh snow. Every house he passed had light in the windows, yellow squares of belonging. But none opened their doors. Not yet. By the time he reached the boarding house, his gloves were stiff with cold. He had to knock twice before the innkeeper opened, her mouth already twisted with questions she didn't speak. "The room's upstairs," she said flatly. Thad looked down, then up. His breath curled from his lips like smoke. "I'll take the back storage. Don't need a bed. Just a roof." She didn't argue. Inside, the room smelled of old onions and frost. A cot leaned against one wall. Dust clung to everything like judgment. He moved to the window and wiped away a patch of fog with his sleeve. Outside, Sonawy kept living. Wagons passed. Horses steamed in the cold. A church bell rang once, too late for grace, too early for morning. Thad sat in the silence, letter in his lap, wheels marked with frost. The rejection echoed in his bones louder than any gunshot. But it didn't kill him. Not this time. He set the letter aside, unfolded a piece of cloth from his coat, and began wiping down his wheels, slow, methodical, deliberate. Because when the world takes your legs, you learn to keep your hands moving. Because sometimes survival ain't loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet act of staying when every part of you wants to leave. And outside, somewhere between smoke and snow, someone had seen him without turning away. That, he thought, might mean something yet. The sun in Sonawy didn't so much rise as bleed across the rooftops, amber spilling through chimney smoke and frost-bitten trees. In the narrow alley behind the laundry shack, steam curled up from a washtub like a ghost remembering warmth. Etta Mae Dillard stood with her sleeves rolled high and hands in freezing water, humming a hymn under her breath, though the words never came. She didn't sing anymore. Not since the baby died. Not since her husband drank himself into a ditch 3 winters ago and left her with debt, silence, and a name folks spoke with half a sneer. Dillard. Like she'd chosen that ending. Still, she scrubbed. Soap bit her knuckles. Her back ached from standing since dawn. But the linens came clean, and that at least felt like control. Behind her, a crate toppled. She turned quickly. Not startled. She didn't startle easy anymore, but alert, like a woman who knew how quickly peace turned on its heel. A man in a wheelchair wrestled with a wooden box just past the alley mouth. Books had spilled onto the snow, pages fluttering, ink smearing. She recognized him from the depot, the one the widow spat on like an old apple core. He didn't curse, just muttered something low and leaned forward, trying to reach the farthest volume. His glove barely brushed it. The wheel shifted. He strained. Etta stepped forward, still drying her hands on her apron. "Mind if I help?" she asked gently. He looked up, startled, his face drawn but not unkind. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to the edge of his temple, barely visible beneath the shadow of his hat. "I can get it," he said, but the lie was quiet. She nodded anyway and knelt, gathering the scattered books with clean precision. Her hands moved fast, like she feared he might change his mind and wheel away before she was done. When she handed him the last volume, their fingers touched. Cold leather met warm callus. He pulled back just enough to be polite. "Thaddeus Boone," he said. "I know." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Everyone knew you'd be arriving. Just not that." She stopped herself. Let the sentence die. "That I'd arrive like this," he finished for her, wry. "No," she said. "Just that you'd stay after the way she left." He blinked, then chuckled, a low, tired sound. "Pride's a poor compass, but it still points somewhere." Etta didn't smile, but something in her eased. She handed him the smallest book, a child's primer, the spine nearly broken. "You teach?" she asked. "Taught cavalry boys how to read trail signs and telegrams. Kept at it during recovery. Reading slower now, but still a kind of survival." "Everything's slower now," she said, more to herself than to him. He looked at her, really looked, and for a heartbeat she wanted to shrink. But there was no pity in his gaze. Just recognition, the kind shared by people who'd buried too much and come back quieter. She shifted. "There's a ramp behind the bakery. Easier on the arms than this ice. Leads past the livery. Back way into town." He nodded, adjusted the crate on his lap. "Appreciate it." And then he wheeled off, steady and silent, leaving only the prints of rubber wheels and a faint warmth in the air between them. The next morning, a sheepskin blanket rested on the windowsill of his room, the one above the storage cellar where he'd chosen to stay. Etta recognized it as one of hers. An old thing from her boy's crib, soft and worn at the edges, but warm. She didn't leave a note. Thad didn't ask questions. That afternoon, he brought a parcel to her back stoop, a wrapped bundle of clothes she hadn't asked to be mended. The seams had been restitched with military precision. Each button replaced, each tear patched without pomp. She opened it inside and stared for a long while before placing it, reverently, atop her son's old dresser. In town, whispers slithered. At the general store, a woman sniffed, loudly, behind her glove. That Dillard girl's got a taste for charity cases, it seems. At the church, Etta found herself seated alone again, pews parting around her like oil from water. She didn't mind the silence, she was used to it, but she minded how it reached for Thad, too. She saw him once from across the square. Children were watching him pass, one whispering something. He turned his head and smiled, not bitter, not ashamed, just tired, then kept going. That night, the wind howled harder. Etta brewed tea and sat beside her stove, staring at the dance of shadow and firelight. She could have ignored the sound at the window, could have told herself it was the wind or a branch. But something stirred in her, the way the earth stirs before a thaw. She opened the door. He was there, not seeking anything, just passing by in the cold, trying to tighten the buckles on his crate where the leather had cracked. "I got glue," she said, "and thread strong enough to hold." He hesitated. "I don't want to trouble you." "You're not." She stepped aside. He entered slowly. Every wheel turned echoing in the quiet room. The firelight flickered on his face, casting long shadows. He looked older there, but also more alive, like a man no longer trying to vanish. She poured tea. He held the cup with both hands, savoring its warmth like it was a rare thing. "Sonawy doesn't change easy," she said. "I'm not here to change it," he replied. "Just exist in it. That's harder than it sounds." He nodded. "Yeah." They sat in silence after that. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Outside, snow whispered against the shutters. Inside, two people drank from the same pot, neither offering false comfort. Before he left, he looked down at the sheepskin blanket still folded near the fire. "You're kind," he said. "Not many are without reason." "I got reasons," she said, voice low. "Just none you can see." He didn't ask her to explain. She was grateful for that. He wheeled back into the night. She closed the door behind him, then stood there with her hand on the wood, as if his absence had left a warmth she didn't want the wind to steal. Upstairs, she lay down in her narrow bed and watched the snow fall through a crack in the roof. For the first time in 3 winters, she whispered a song, not loud, not whole, just a thread of melody meant for no one but herself. And outside, under that same Sonawy sky, Thaddeus Boone rolled through the hush, feeling something like a door not quite closed behind him. The rain came sudden and cold, slanting across Sonawy like it had business here. Mud bloomed in the alleys, soaking the wooden walkways, turning the spaces between buildings into shallow streams. Thaddeus Boone wheeled beneath the eaves of the livery stable, shoulders hunched against the downpour, his coat damp and heavy. A repaired satchel sat in his lap, tools clinking inside, mended harness straps for coin, his only steady work these days. He wasn't meant to be there long, just waiting for the worst of the weather to pass. But then she arrived. Etta May Dillard moved through the rain like a woman who didn't mind being seen wet. Her shawl clung to her arms, and a wide straw had tilted low against the drops. When she caught sight of him, she didn't flinch or detour. She simply walked under the same awning, eyes scanning the sky as if it might apologize. "You're still out in this?" she asked, wringing the edge of her sleeve. He gestured to the storm with a tired smile. "Seems I forgot how to outrun things." That earned him a quiet laugh. She leaned back against the stable wall, close enough he could smell lye and rain in her clothes. "They say it'll turn to sleet by sundown," she murmured. "Of course it will," he said. "It's Tuesday." They stood that way a while, neither moving, neither filling the silence with what wasn't needed. Horses shifted in the stalls behind them, snorting steam into the cold. Then a voice rang out across the square. "Well, look at that." Cripple found himself a laundress to pity him. A sharp bark of laughter followed, echoing between saloon walls and shuttered windows. Etta stiffened. Thad's jaw didn't move, but his eyes dimmed a fraction. His hands remained still on the rims of his wheels. She turned slowly, deliberately. The voice had come from Silas Carr, owner of the dry goods store. A man with opinions sharper than his chin. He watched them from beneath his awning, smirking, arms crossed. Townsfolk inside pretended not to listen, but their stillness betrayed them. Etta didn't speak. She walked to Thad's side and reached down, not to comfort, but to help him over the growing puddle. Her hand found the back of his chair, and with a practiced motion, she tilted it just enough to guide one wheel out of the rut. He didn't resist. They moved across the square in silence, her boots splashing, his wheels cutting 2 clean lines through the muck. Not another word was said, but something changed. Later, in her kitchen, she scrubbed the table harder than needed. Her hands trembled when they reached for the flour tin. Shame didn't live in the words, she'd learned. It lived in the silence after. And Thad, that evening, sat by his window and stared at the mangled crate that held his books. It had cracked again. No matter how he fixed it, the leather gave underweight, as if resenting the burden. He tried to repair it with shaking fingers, but tonight he failed. The stitch snapped. He closed his eyes. Once long ago he'd been a scout, light on his feet, fast with a rifle, sharp in the saddle. His legs had carried him over canyons, through gunfire, into places other men feared to go. He remembered the last moment they'd answered him, the sharp flare of pain, the scream of a dying horse, the dust lifting as he hit the ground, and nothing below the waist came with him. There were no medals, only silence and shame. A horse you fed in secret. The next morning, a child stood outside Etta's shack, holding something bundled in oilcloth. "For Mr. Boone," the boy said, grinning with missing teeth. Mama said to deliver it right quick. Inside the cloth was a soft loaf of cornbread, still warm. No note, just kindness, handed down like a quilt from one soul to another. Thad didn't eat it right away. He placed it on his windowsill, sat beside it, and watched the town go on pretending it didn't notice him. That same day, he fixed Etta's back porch step without asking. Took him an hour, some scavenged nails, and a clever brace carved from a broken chair leg. When she found it, she said nothing, just touched the wood like it might speak. Spring crept in slow. The frost melted from the eaves. Snow turned to mud, and mud gave way to small green shoots poking through the cracks in the boardwalk. Thad tried the hill again. It was the same path behind the boarding house, up to the bakery, where he sometimes bought day-old crusts. He'd built a harness system from rope and pulley to help him, but it was still steep, and this time the wheels slipped in the thawing dirt. He fell sideways. No one saw. No one came. His gloves tore open. His cheek hit stone. For a moment he just lay there, tasting blood, staring at the sky. That's when he heard her boots. Etta appeared without words, without ceremony. She didn't gasp. She didn't chide. She crouched beside him, her hands hovering once, waiting for permission, before touching his shoulder. "You hurt." He shook his head. She helped him up, quietly, like patching laundry, like mending a soul in pieces. Back on level ground, he didn't thank her. She didn't ask. But that night, as thunder growled over the plains, Thad left something at her door, a whittled slat of cedar, shaped into a wildflower. Rough but delicate. The kind of carving done by someone with time and care, but little vanity. She pressed it to her heart before placing it beside her stove. At the church on Sunday, she didn't sit in the back pew anymore. She waited outside, coat buttoned to her throat, and when Thad wheeled up the path, she fell into step beside him. No one said a thing, but all saw. They sat side by side as the preacher read from Scripture, and when the service ended, Etta placed her hand on Thad's shoulder and steered him gently down the aisle, past the gossip, past the pity, past the place where shame once stood. And that, for the first time in many years, felt like freedom. Spring settled over Sonawy like a hesitant guest, brushing soft green across the hills and warming the earth just enough to loosen winter's hold. The wind still carried a bite, but beneath it bloomed the faint perfume of lilacs and thawed mud. It was in that gentle stretch of days, when frost no longer crusted the window panes, that Thaddeus Boone built something more permanent than shelter. He arrived at Etta's doorstep just after dawn, a canvas bundle in his lap and sawdust clinging to his cuffs. She answered in a linen shift and loose braid, blinking sleep from her eyes. "You're early," she said. "Best work gets done before the town's awake enough to interfere." She tilted her head, studying him. He looked lighter, somehow. Not in body. His shoulders remained narrow beneath the blue wool, but in gaze, in the quiet confidence of a man who'd chosen not to vanish. "Come in," she said. He didn't. Instead, he wheeled around the side of the house, stopping by the slanted back stoop where her laundry baskets always rocked crooked in the wind. She followed, arms crossed, curious. "Your porch," he said, nodding. "I've been thinking about it. It survived this long." "Barely," he replied. "And you shouldn't have to haul wet linens over loose boards." She stared at him, lips parted. Then, without a word, she knelt and unrolled the bundle beside him. Inside, shaped planks, metal braces, nails arranged with soldier's precision. "You made this?" she asked. He nodded. "Modified a ramp system I rigged for the boarding house. Figured you deserve better footing." Etta touched one board, smooth and sanded, edges softened by care. "Why?" she whispered. Thad didn't look up from the blueprint in his lap. "Because you never looked away." They worked together that morning. She held beams while he hammered, steadying him when the wind picked up. He showed her how to check for level ground, how to brace against sag. She moved with quiet competence, and he didn't speak often, but each silence between them was companionable. By midday, the new stoop stood, low, sturdy, and just wide enough to fit a wheel and a woman side by side. It was plain, but it held. Etta sat on the top step, brushing sawdust from her skirt. Most men wouldn't build something they'll never walk on. Thad handed her a tin cup of well water. Most men don't get a second chance to be useful. A hush stretched between them, warm and unhurried. Chickens clucked nearby. Bees moved lazily through the budding sage. Etta took a sip, then asked, "Do you miss it?" "The walking." He looked at the ground. His hands flexed once on the rims of his wheels. "I miss the feeling of arriving somewhere without being stared at." "But the legs themselves?" "Not anymore. They went where I told them, sure. But they also took me into things I didn't always come back from." She didn't press. Later that week, she found another gift on her stoop, a small carving shaped like a running horse, but its legs were left unfinished. Smooth where limbs should have been, it balanced on the arc of its own belly. When she held it, it didn't feel broken. It felt true. She placed it above the kitchen hearth. The town, for its part, watched with uneasy curiosity. Sonawy folk didn't like change, but they respected craft. And when Etta's back stoop began drawing attention, some of the frost thawed. "Boo knows his woodwork," murmured the general store clerk, pretending not to look. "He's not useless," said one ranch hand, spitting in the dust. Just slowed. Some nodded. Others looked away. And then Sunday came again. This time, Thad rolled to the church door and waited. Etta met him there in a pale blue dress she hadn't worn in years. She offered her arm, not as helper, but as equal, and they entered together. No one laughed. No one sneered. And when the preacher began the sermon, his voice cracked ever so slightly as he glanced down at Thad and nodded once, as if to say, "You are seen. You are still here." After the service, as children ran past and the bell tolled high, Thad turned to Etta. "There's something I'd like to show you," he said. They traveled past town, where the land opened into wheatgrass and whispering hills. He guided her to a spot under the cottonwoods, just off the old trade road, where a canvas tarp lay pinned by rocks. Beneath it, the beginnings of a cabin foundation. Rough, rectangular, marked by stakes and rope. Her breath caught. "You building a house?" she asked. "I thought I might. Something small. Close enough to town to be useful. Far enough to be mine. You'll need help." He smiled, hands resting on the wheels. "I was hoping you'd say that." She walked the outline of it slowly, fingers grazing the rope. Then she turned to face him. "Why here?" He looked up at the sky, then at her. "Because this is where I stopped feeding shame and started wanting something more." The breeze moved between them, lifting her braid, rustling the grass like applause. And in that moment, under the open sky and against the rhythm of new growth, something unspoken passed between them, soft as a vow, sure as spring returning to cold ground. It started with smoke curling against the evening sky, thin as thread but dark as sin. Sonawy had known fire before, kitchen mishaps, barn lanterns kicked by panicked horses. But this wasn't that. This was quick and mean, born of a dry wind and a spark no one claimed. The stable caught first, and by the time the church bell rang in alarm, flames had chewed through half the hayloft. Screams echoed down the main road, mingled with the sharp bellowing of horses and the thud of boots racing in every direction. Thaddeus Boone had just finished smoothing the last beam on his cabin frame when the first scent hit him. Burnt cedar and panic. He didn't pause, didn't wait for someone to ask. His hands moved on their own, guiding the wheels of his chair down the narrow trail, faster than anyone would have thought possible. Smoke thickened as he rolled into town, the heat pulsing against his skin like a second heart. Townsfolk were gathered in chaos. Buckets passed, men shouting, children corralled to the corners. But it wasn't the stable that stopped him. It was the laundry shack. Across the square, barely visible through the curling smoke, he saw it. The roof catching light, fire licking like a cruel tongue across the back eaves. And through the broken side window, a face. Small, round, screaming. Etta's niece, Sarah. Someone yelled her name, but no one moved. The heat had turned the path to the laundry into a corridor of flames. Too narrow for horses, too dangerous for boots, too impossible for a man in a wheelchair. But Thad didn't hesitate. He veered down the alley, hands blistering as he twisted the wheels over gravel and soot. The smoke stung his eyes. The ash clung to his coat. He reached the back of the shack, the ramp he'd built months ago, already burning at the edges. He didn't curse. He didn't pray. He tied the rope harness around his chest, something he'd fashioned for hauling supplies up his new cabin trail. Then, looping the end around the wheel hubs, he pulled, dragging himself up the slope with burning lungs and shaking arms. The child's sobs were fainter now. The shack groaned. The roof buckled. Time cracked like a whip. He reached the door just as it collapsed inward. Smoke swallowed him. Etta had been helping at the schoolhouse when the bell tolled. When she heard the words, laundry shack, fire, child inside, she ran, barefoot. No thought of dress or danger. By the time she arrived, townsfolk had gathered, forming a loose, helpless circle around the wreckage. A few men held her back. She screamed to be let go, and then the door burst open. A figure emerged, low, blackened with soot, cradling something small in his arms. The wheels of Thad's chair had scorched and melted. The right one cracked halfway down the spoke, but he rolled forward with every muscle he had left. The child coughed, then wailed. The crowd went silent, and Etta ran. She fell to her knees beside them, snatching Sarah from his lap, sobbing thanks against the girl's filthy hair. When she looked up, her eyes met Thad's. His hands trembled. His coat was scorched, lips cracked from smoke. But his face was calm. "You fool," she whispered, tears cutting lines through the soot on her cheeks. "You glorious, stubborn fool." And then she kissed him, brow first, reverent and grateful, then lips, desperate and certain. It wasn't a kiss for thanks. It was a kiss for coming back. Behind them, the shack collapsed. The townsfolk rushed forward. Buckets poured. But the fire had already given up what mattered. Later, when the smoke was just a memory and the stars returned to their watchful perch, Thad lay on a cot in the schoolhouse infirmary, his burned palms bandaged, lips blistered but curled in something close to peace. Etta sat beside him, one hand curled gently over his. "You didn't even shout for help," she said softly. "I didn't need to," he rasped. "I just needed to get her out. She would have died." He nodded. "So would the part of me that hadn't done it." She bent low and laid her forehead against the back of his hand. "I ain't gonna let you go, Thaddeus Boone." His eyes closed. "Good. Because I've only just arrived." They married 3 weeks later, not under stained glass or before crowds, but beneath the cottonwoods near the half-built cabin. The town came. Not all, but enough. The preacher said quiet words, and the wind carried them upward. There were no grand vows. Just a promise exchanged with fingers interlaced and eyes wide open. A man who'd once been thrown away stood, No sat, with his shoulders straight, wheels blackened by fire, but polished clean. A woman who'd once buried herself in silence now wore blue again. Afterward, they sat on the new porch together, watching light spill gold over the hills. Thad leaned against her, his breath even, the ache in his arms familiar now, like a song that hurt but never soured. "You ever think," he said, "that love was something made for other people?" "All the time," she whispered. "But you changed that." He turned to her, eyes soft. "No, you did." A breeze moved through the cottonwoods. Somewhere a hawk cried, and the land stretched wide and waiting. And if you ever pass through Sonawy, ask about the man with the scorched wheels and the woman who never turned away. They'll tell you a story, not of pity, but of fire, of stubborn grace, and the kind of vow that doesn't need an altar to be holy. Because sometimes, when the world breaks you down, love builds you up from the ruins. And sometimes the strongest men are the ones who rise without standing.